The sun was dying over the Kansas prairie, bleeding crimson and purple across a sky that seemed to stretch forever. Red dust swirled in the hot wind, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that made breathing feel like swallowing sand. Margaret Maggie O'Sullivan stood in the doorway of the weathered farmhouse, her small bundle clutched against her chest, watching the light fade with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She could hear him inside. Samuel Harrington, her guardian these past 4 years since the fever took her parents, the clink of his whiskey bottle against the table, the scrape of his chair. Any moment now. He'd notice she wasn't scrubbing the kitchen floor like he'd ordered. Any moment now. He'd come looking. And this time she knew with bone-deep certainty, he'd make good on his threats. "You try to run again, girl." His voice echoed in her memory, rough as the rope burns on her wrists from the last time he'd caught her. "And I'll put you in the ground next to your ma in PA. Nobody'll miss one more orphan brat." The words had burned themselves into her mind. "He'll kill me if I go back." Maggie's fingers trembled as she adjusted the thin shawl around her shoulders. 18 years old, though she felt ancient some days, worn down by endless chores and the constant weight of fear. Her dress, once blue but now faded to the color of old dishwater, was patched in a dozen places. In her bundle, a change of undergarments, her mother's Bible, a small knife she'd stolen from the kitchen, 2 apples, and a piece of hard bread. Not much to start a new life with, but it would have to do. The screen door creaked behind her, and her heart nearly stopped, but it was just the wind. Still, it spurred her into action. She stepped off the porch, her worn boots silent on the packed earth. The tall grass of the prairie beckoned, golden waves that could hide her if she could just make it past the fence line. 20 steps, 30. Her breath came in short gasps, though she tried to keep quiet. The evening insects had begun their chorus, crickets and cicadas filling the air with their song. It might mask the sound of her flight, she hoped. "Margaret!" The roar from the house sent ice through her veins. She broke into a run, skirts tangling around her legs. Behind her, she heard the crash of the door slamming open. Samuel's curses carrying on the wind. "You get back here, girl. You know what happens to runaways." But she didn't look back, couldn't look back. The fence loomed ahead. Rough wooden posts connected by rusted wire. She'd watched him mend it just last week, her hands still bearing the scratches from holding the wire taut while he hammered. Now she hiked up her skirts and climbed, ignoring the barbs that caught at her clothes and skin. The dogs started barking, Rex and Brutus, the 2 mastiffs Samuel kept half-starved to make them mean. Their deep baying sent fresh terror through her. She tumbled over the fence, landing hard on the other side, and scrambled to her feet. The grass here was chest-high, thick prairie blue stem that whispered and swayed. She plunged into it, pushing forward as fast as she could. The stalks whipped at her face and arms, but she welcomed their cover. Behind her, the barking grew louder, joined now by the thunder of hoofbeats. Lord in heaven. He'd saddled his horse. Maggie's lungs burned as she ran, zigzagging through the grass. She could hear Samuel shouting to the dogs, directing them. The sun had nearly set now, painting everything in shades of gray and shadow. If she could just hold out until full dark. Her foot caught in a prairie dog hole, and she went down hard, biting back a cry of pain. Her ankle throbbed, but she forced herself up and limped on. The land here dipped and rolled, carved by wind and ancient waters. She spotted a darker shadow ahead, a small ravine cutting through the prairie. The dogs were closer now. She could hear them crashing through the grass, their excited yelps telling her they'd found her trail. With no other choice, she half ran, half slid down the side of the ravine, her bundle bouncing against her ribs. At the bottom, a narrow creek trickled over rocks. She splashed through it, hoping the water might confuse the dog's sense of smell, then scrambled up the far bank. Her dress was soaked and muddy now, her hair falling loose from its pins. There, a cluster of limestone rocks jutting from the ravine wall, forming a small overhang, not quite a cave, but deep enough to hide in shadows. She squeezed herself into the space, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The barking echoed off the ravine walls. She pressed her face against her knees, breathing in the smell of wet wool and dirt, and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. Her ankle throbbed with each heartbeat, somewhere above. Samuel's horse whinnied. "Margaret, I know you're down there!" His voice boomed through the growing darkness. "You come out now, and maybe I'll only give you the strap. Make me come find you, and you'll wish you'd never been born." She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, fighting the urge to whimper. "He'll kill me if I go back." The certainty of it kept her frozen in place, even as every instinct screamed at her to run. The dogs splashed through the creek, their barks echoing. One of them, Rex, she thought, came so close she could hear him panting. But the water and the approaching night seemed to have confused their trail. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, she heard Samuel cursing and calling them back. "Fine then," he shouted. "You want to die out here? The coyotes and wolves will find you before morning, and when they do, I'll tell everyone you ran off with some no-good drifter. Nobody'll come looking. Nobody'll care." She listened to them climb back up the ravine, the sounds gradually fading. Still, she didn't move. The rocks were cold against her back, and she could feel small things, spiders probably, moving in the crevices around her. But she stayed put as full darkness settled over the prairie. The night came alive with new sounds. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their calls raising the hair on her arms. An owl hooted somewhere above. The creek gurgled softly, a peaceful sound at odds with her racing heart. She'd never been outside at night. Not really. Samuel had always kept her locked in after dark. Gradually, her breathing slowed. Her ankle still hurt, but it held her weight when she finally dared to creep from her hiding place. She couldn't stay here. Come morning, he might return with more men, maybe even pay some of the local boys to track her. She needed to put distance between herself and the farm. But which way? She'd rarely been off the property in 4 years. Town lay to the east, she knew that much, but showing up there would be as good as signing her own death warrant. Samuel Harrington was a respected man, a church deacon. Who'd believe an orphan girl over him? West, then, into the wilderness. She'd heard talk of settlements out there, places where a person could disappear and start fresh. It was dangerous. Indian territory, some said, though she'd also heard the tribes had been pushed further north. Either way, it had to be better than what waited behind her. She climbed out of the ravine, wincing with each step. The moon had risen, 3/4 full, painting the prairie in silver. She could see well enough to walk, though every shadow might hide a predator. She'd never felt so alone, so small beneath the vast canvas of stars. But there was something else, too. For the first time in 4 years, no walls confined her, no locked doors, no threatening presence looming over her shoulder. The night air tasted of sage and grass and freedom. Yes, she was scared, terrified, even, but she was also free. She adjusted her bundle and began walking west, letting the moon guide her. Her wet skirts dragged at her legs, and her ankles sent sharp pains up her shin with each step, but she kept going. 1 foot in front of the other. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, a long, mournful sound that seemed to echo her own mixed feelings of loss and liberation. She was leaving behind everything she'd known, walking into an uncertain future with nothing but the clothes on her back and the determination not to be a victim anymore. The prairie stretched endlessly before her, and she disappeared into it like a ghost, leaving behind only footprints that the morning wind would soon erase. Behind her lay bondage and certain death. Ahead waited the unknown. She chose the unknown. Dawn broke like a furnace over the endless prairie, the sun climbing from the horizon in waves of orange and gold that set the dry grass ablaze with light. Maggie squinted against the brightness, her eyes gritty from a sleepless night of walking. The morning brought no relief from the heat that had been building since before sunrise, and already she could feel sweat gathering beneath her collar. Her throat was parched, tongue thick and swollen in her mouth. The last of her water, what little she'd managed to scoop from that creek, had run out hours ago. She'd been foolish not to find a way to carry more, but in her haste to escape, She hadn't thought that far ahead. Now the vast grassland stretched before her without a tree or stream in sight. Just rolling hills covered in brittle yellow grass that whispered dryly in the wind. The morning mist that had briefly cooled her skin was burning off now, revealing the true scope of her situation. She was a tiny figure in an ocean of grass, with no landmarks to guide her except the sun's path. Her ankle, swollen and purple from last night's fall, screamed with each step. The boots that had seemed sturdy enough on the farm were already showing wear, the right sole starting to separate from the leather. A gust of wind struck her face, carrying with it a wall of fine sand that stung her eyes and filled her nose. She pulled her shawl up over her head, but the sand found its way through every gap, coating her skin with a layer of grit. These sand winds were common on the prairie. She knew, but experiencing one in the open was different from watching through a window. She forced herself to keep moving, though each step was agony. Standing still meant death, if not from thirst. Then from Samuel finding her, or from the other dangers that stalked the prairie. She'd already spotted buzzards circling to the south, their presence a grim reminder of how unforgiving this land could be. By mid-morning, the heat had become a living thing, pressing down on her like a weight. Her dress, still damp from last night's creek crossing, now clung to her with sweat. The bundle containing her few possessions felt like it weighed 100 pounds. She considered abandoning it, but couldn't bring herself to part with her mother's Bible. It was the last tangible connection to her former life, to the time before Samuel Harrington. Through the shimmering heat waves, she spotted something that made her heart leap. A dark line on the horizon that might be trees. Trees meant water, possibly shade. She altered her course, limping toward it with renewed determination, though it seemed to remain frustratingly distant no matter how long she walked. The sun climbed higher, brutal in its intensity. Her fair skin, unused to such exposure, began to burn. She could feel blisters forming on her shoulders where the dress had torn. Her lips cracked and split, tasting of copper and salt. Then, through the dancing heat mirages, she saw movement. Her heart hammered as shapes materialized. Riders, at least 3 of them, moving along a rise to her north. She dropped to her knees in the tall grass, ignoring the sharp stalks that poked through her skirts. Were they searching for her? Had Samuel sent out word already? But as she watched, peering through the grass, she realized these weren't local ranch hands. Their pack horses were loaded with bundles of fur, and their clothing marked them as traders, rough men who made their living in the wilderness, trading with Indians and trappers alike. She could hear their voices carrying on the wind, though not clear enough to make out words. One of them, a man with a beard like a bird's nest, gestured toward the west, and she caught fragments of their conversation. "Army's been pushing the Sioux north. Skirmishes near the Platte." Another trader, younger with a fox fur cap despite the heat, spat tobacco juice. "Heard there's a reward out for some runaway girl. Stole from her employer. They say $100 to whoever brings her back." Maggie's blood ran cold. $100 was more than most men saw in months. Samuel had put a bounty on her. And worse, he'd lied about her crime. She hadn't stolen anything except the kitchen knife and food for survival. But who would believe her? "Must have done more than steal," the bearded one said with a rough laugh. "Man don't offer that kind of money for a missing servant girl unless she knows something she shouldn't." They moved on, their voices fading, but Maggie remained frozen in place long after they'd disappeared over the rise. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a physical blow. It wasn't just Samuel she had to fear now. Every person she met might be looking to collect that bounty. When she finally dared to move again, the sun was at its zenith. The line of trees seemed no closer, wavering in the heat like a cruel mirage. Her water-starved mind began playing tricks. She saw lakes that vanished when she blinked, heard her mother's voice calling her name. She stumbled over a prairie dog mound and went down hard, her ankle giving way completely. For a moment, she lay there in the dust and grass, overwhelmed by pain and despair. It would be so easy to give up, to let the prairie claim her. At least then Samuel wouldn't get the satisfaction of killing her himself. but something deep inside refused to surrender. Maybe it was her Irish stubbornness, inherited from parents who'd crossed an ocean for a better life. Maybe it was pure spite. Whatever it was, it got her back on her feet. The trees were real. She discovered an hour later, though calling them trees was generous. They were more like tall bushes, cottonwoods stunted by drought, clustered around what might have once been a stream bed. The ground beneath them was dry, cracked earth with only the faintest dampness to suggest water had ever flowed here. Still, they provided shade, and she collapsed beneath the largest one, her body trembling with exhaustion. She dug desperately at the stream bed with her hands, hoping to find water beneath the surface, but found only more dry earth. The effort left her fingers bloody and her hope dimmer. As the afternoon wore on, she forced herself to think rationally. She couldn't stay here. The trader's words made that clear. Everyone would be looking for her now, drawn by the promise of reward. She needed to get farther from civilization, into territories where Samuel's reach couldn't extend. The mountains. She'd heard talk of mountains to the west, places where a person could disappear. Mining camps and frontier towns where nobody asked about your past as long as you could work. It was a slim hope, but better than none. She used her knife to cut strips from her petticoat, wrapping them around her blistered feet inside her boots. Every movement was agony, but she had to keep going. As the sun began its descent, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rust, she emerged from the pitiful shelter of the cottonwoods. The western horizon showed the faintest suggestion of distant peaks, purple shadows that might have been mountains or simply more tricks of the light. She fixed her eyes on them and walked, each step a small victory against despair. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another, then another. They were probably following her, waiting for her to fall. Even predators knew the look of prey in distress, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Not today. As darkness began to creep across the land once more, she allowed herself one look back. Somewhere behind her was the farm where she'd spent 4 years in misery. Somewhere back there. Samuel Harrington was probably sitting down to supper, confident that his money would bring her back to face his wrath. "He'll kill me if I go back," she whispered to the empty prairie, the words both a reminder and a promise to herself. She would die out here before she let that happen. The stars began to appear, and she walked on into another night, a small, determined figure refusing to be broken by the vastness that surrounded her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, but it would also bring her farther from the life she'd fled. That alone was worth the pain. The pine forest was a different world from the open prairie, darker, cooler, filled with the whisper of wind through needles and the creak of ancient wood. Maggie had been walking for 3 days now, her water gone, surviving on pine nuts and the few berries she dared eat. The mountains that had seemed so distant were closer now, their peaks shrouded in afternoon clouds. She moved carefully through the undergrowth, her torn dress catching on branches, leaving threads behind like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. The forest floor was treacherous with hidden roots and sudden drops. Her injured ankle, now swollen to twice its size, made each step an act of will. It happened so quickly she had no time to react. The ground simply vanished beneath her feet, a small cliff hidden by overhanging ferns. She tumbled down the rocky slope, her bundle flying from her grasp, the world spinning in a kaleidoscope of green and brown and pain. When she finally came to rest, sprawled in a bed of pine needles, stars danced across her vision. She lay there, dazed and hurting, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Her palms were scraped raw, her dress torn in several new places. When she tried to sit up, the world tilted alarmingly. "You fall like white woman, much noise, no grace." The voice came from above, deep and measured, each word carefully pronounced. Maggie's heart stopped. She looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the canopy. A man, but unlike any she'd seen in town. His hair was long and black, held back with a leather cord. His clothing was a mix of buckskin and trader cloth, and across his back was slung a rifle, an Indian. Her mind supplied all of Samuel's warnings, all the terrible stories she'd heard about savage attacks and scalping. But as the man descended the slope with fluid grace, making no sound despite the loose rocks, she noticed something that didn't fit those stories: caution in his movements, wariness in his dark eyes that matched her own fear. He stopped several feet away, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30 years old, with sharp cheekbones and a scar across his left eyebrow. When he spoke again, his English was careful but clear. "Your foot," he gestured to her ankle, "is bad hurt. You cannot walk far." Maggie pushed herself against a tree trunk, trying to put distance between them despite having nowhere to go. "Stay back," she managed, though her voice cracked with thirst. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "You are in no position for commands, white woman." He set down his rifle, slowly, deliberately, and pulled a water skin from his belt. "Drink first, then we talk." The sight of the water overwhelmed her caution. When he tossed the skin to her, she caught it and drank greedily, the cool liquid like life itself flowing down her parched throat. She forced herself to stop before she made herself sick, though every instinct screamed for more. "Slowly," he advised. "Too much, too fast. You be sick." She lowered the skin, wiping her mouth with a trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered. He retrieved her scattered belongings with quick efficiency, handling her mother's Bible with surprising care. "You run from someone," he said. It wasn't a question. "White women do not walk alone in forest unless they run." Maggie's fingers tightened on the water skin. How much to tell, but what choice did she have? She could barely stand, let alone continue on her own. My guardian, she swallowed hard. "He hurts me, says he'll kill me if I go back." The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance. "This guardian he follows, he's put out a reward, $100 for bringing me back." Now his eyebrows rose slightly. Much money for one small woman. He moved closer, still maintaining distance, but near enough that she could see the intelligence in his eyes. "I am called Joseph Walker by white men. My true name." He said something in a language she didn't recognize, musical and complex. "But Joseph is easier for white tongues." "Maggie," she offered tentatively. "Margaret O'Sullivan." Joseph nodded, then gestured to her ankle. "I can help, but I must touch—" "You permit." The idea of letting a strange man, especially an Indian, touch her went against every warning she'd ever received, but her ankle was beyond her ability to tend. And despite her fear, something about his careful distance and formal way of asking made her nod. His hands were gentle but sure as he examined the injury, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out. "Not broken," he announced, "but bad." "How you say?" He made a twisting motion. "Sprained?" "Yes, sprained." He pulled plants from a pouch at his side, leaves she didn't recognize, and began crushing them between his palms. The sharp, medicinal smell filled the air. "This helps with hurt and—" he mimed, swelling going down. As he worked, creating a poultice and binding her ankle with strips of soft leather from his pack, Maggie found her fear ebbing slightly. His movements were practiced, almost healing-like. "You're a doctor?" she asked. A sound that might have been a bitter laugh escaped him. "No, but I learned from necessity. When army doctors will not help your people, you learn or you watch them die." The words hung heavy between them. She knew about the conflicts between the army and the Indians. Everyone did. But hearing it from this perspective, from someone who'd lived it, made it real in a way newspaper accounts never had. Night was falling, purple shadows deepening beneath the pines. Joseph built a fire with swift efficiency, the smoke minimal and dispersed by the wind. The smell of burning pine resin filled the air, sharp and clean. "You cannot travel tonight," he said, settling across the fire from her. "Tomorrow, maybe, if swelling goes down." Maggie pulled her shawl tighter, aware of how vulnerable she was. "Why are you helping me?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of memory. 6 winters ago, my sister run from soldier who wanted what she would not give. She run into storm, into cold. We find her 3 days later." He didn't need to say more. The outcome was clear in his tone. "I'm sorry," Maggie whispered. He shrugged, but she could see the old pain in the gesture. "Your guardian, he is like that soldier, taking because he can." She nodded, unable to voice the truth aloud. But Joseph seemed to understand. His jaw tightened, and he muttered something in his own language that needed no translation. They sat in companionable silence as darkness deepened around them. Joseph pulled dried meat from his pack, offering her some. It was tough and salty, but filling. As she chewed, she studied him across the fire. Everything she'd been taught said she should be terrified. But instead, she felt safer than she had in years. "Where do you go?" he asked eventually. "What is your plan?" I thought maybe the mountains, or a mining camp, somewhere he won't find me." Joseph shook his head. "Mining camps are no place for women alone, full of rough men, much drinking. You would find trouble different from what you flee, but trouble still." Her heart sank. She'd known it was a slim hope, but it had been something to aim for. "Then where?" he considered, poking at the fire with a stick. "There is settlement 2 days north, Fort Collins, bigger town, easier to disappear. But your guardian, he will look there too. Then I'll go further, maybe California, or you have money for such travel?" Her silence was answer enough. Joseph sighed, the sound carrying a mix of frustration and something like pity. White woman with no money, no family, injured foot. You will not last week alone. Then what would you suggest? The words came out sharper than intended, born of fear and exhaustion. "Should I just go back and let him—" "No." The word was firm, cutting off her spiral toward despair. "You do not go back, but maybe—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I traveled a trading post in mountains, 3 days walk. You could come until foot heals, until you make better plan." The offer hung in the air between them. Everything about her upbringing screamed that this was dangerous, that traveling with a strange man, especially an Indian, was asking for trouble. But what were her alternatives? Die alone in the forest? Be caught by bounty hunters? I couldn't pay you." "I do not ask for payment." His voice carried a hint of offense. "I offer help, not trade." "But why? You don't know me. I could be lying about everything." Joseph's eyes met hers across the fire. "Perhaps, but I see bruises on your wrists. Fear in your eyes that does not lie. I know what it is to run from those who would harm you." He stood, moving to tend the fire. "Sleep now. Decide in morning." He gave her his blanket despite her protests, settling himself against a tree with his rifle across his knees. As she lay by the fire, wrapped in wool that smelled of smoke and pine, Maggie watched him through half-closed eyes. He faced away from the fire, keeping watch on the darkness beyond their small circle of light. For the first time in 3 days, perhaps the first time in 4 years, she felt protected. The feeling was so foreign it brought tears to her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. But tonight, she was warm and fed and not alone. The pine forest sang its night song around them, owl calls and rustling branches and the distant howl of something wild. But Joseph remained steady at his post, a guardian she'd never expected to find, as sleep finally claimed her. Maggie's last coherent thought was wonder at the strange turns life could take. This morning she'd been certain she would die alone. Tonight, an unlikely protector kept watch while she slept. Perhaps there was hope yet. They had been traveling together for 2 days now, picking their way through rocky passes and along ridge lines where the wind howled like a living thing. Joseph, she'd learned he preferred this name when speaking English, moved with an easy grace that made her own stumbling progress seem all the more clumsy. Her ankle, though better thanks to his poultices, still protested with each step. The landscape had changed dramatically from the open prairie. Here, gray stone cliffs rose on either side of narrow valleys, and the vegetation was sparse, juniper and sage clinging to life in the thin soil. Storm clouds gathered overhead, dark and pregnant with threat, casting everything in an ominous twilight despite it being midday. "Storm comes," Joseph said, eyeing the sky with practiced wariness. "We find shelter soon." They pushed on, the wind growing stronger with each passing minute. Dust devils danced across their path, and Maggie had to hold her shawl tight to keep it from being torn away. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, cold and shocking against her sun-warmed skin. Joseph led them to an overhang of rock, not quite a cave, but deep enough to provide protection. They huddled there as the storm unleashed its fury, rain falling in sheets that turned the dry ground into rushing streams within minutes. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very mountains. "Your people," Maggie said, raising her voice over the storm. "Where are they?" Joseph's face darkened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. "North," he said finally. "What is left? Many died in the winter camps when soldiers came. My mother, my sister." He trailed off, staring out at the rain. "The massacre at Sand Creek?" she ventured. She'd read about it in the newspapers, though the accounts had been confused and contradictory. "No, another place, smaller. No newspapers write about it." His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "Soldiers say we raid settlements. We were sleeping. Women and children ran to river, but ice was too thin. Many drowned. Others shot as they ran." Maggie felt the weight of his words settle over her like a physical thing. "Your whole family. Father died fighting, gave others time to run. Mother tried to save my sister's baby, but—" He made a gesture that said everything. "I was hunting, 2 days away. Came back to ashes and frozen bodies." She wanted to say something, offer comfort, express horror, but what words could possibly suffice? Instead, she sat in silence, letting him have his grief without the burden of her inadequate sympathy. After a while, Joseph continued, his voice steadier now. "I work as scout sometimes, for wagon trains, for army even. They trust me because I speak English, because I wear white man clothes when needed. But I do not forget. Why help them at all, after what they did?" He turned to look at her, and she saw the complexity of his situation in his eyes. "Because surviving is its own revenge. Because coins they pay buy food for children who still live. Because sometimes I guide them away from where my people camp." A grim smile touched his lips. "Small rebellions, but mine." The storm raged on, and they settled into companionable silence. Joseph pulled pemmican from his pack, dried meat mixed with berries and fat, and they shared it. As the afternoon wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, their conversation wandered to safer topics. He taught her words in his language. Water, MNI, mountain, he, storm, Osiseka. She told him about Ireland, the green hills her parents had described, the stories of fairies and selkies her mother had whispered at bedtime. "Your parents, how did they die?" he asked eventually. "Cholera. Came through Kansas like wildfire 4 years ago. They were gone within days of each other." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "I was 14. The town council said I needed a guardian, and Samuel volunteered. Everyone thought he was so charitable, taking in an orphan. But he was not charitable. No." The word came out bitter. "He wanted someone to work his farm without wages. Someone to—" She couldn't finish, but Joseph's expression said he understood. At first it was just the work, dawn to past dark, every day. Then the beatings when I was too slow or broke something. Then— "You do not need to say." Joseph interrupted gently. "I understand." The storm was beginning to slacken, the lightning moving away across the peaks. In the growing quiet, their small shelter felt intimate, separate from the world. Maggie found herself studying Joseph's profile as he watched the rain. He was handsome in a way she hadn't expected, not like the rough farm boys she'd known, but with a dignity that came from something deeper than appearance. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He nodded. "That first day, you could have just left me there, or taken me for the reward. Why didn't you—" Joseph was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, When I found my sister by the river, she was holding her baby, both frozen, but still holding. I think, what if someone had helped her? Just one person who saw her fear and chose kindness instead of coins. He shrugged. I cannot save my sister, but maybe I honor her by helping you. Tears pricked Maggie's eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his hand where it rested on his knee. He went very still, looking down at her pale fingers against his darker skin. Thank you, she whispered. He turned his hand palm up, gently closing his fingers around hers. You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, she was Lakota through and through, but in spirit, she also would not surrender to those who would harm her. They sat that way as the storm passed, hands clasped in a connection that transcended words. When the rain finally stopped and weak sunlight broke through the clouds, neither moved immediately. There was something happening between them, something that had nothing to do with gratitude or shared grief, and everything to do with the way her heart sped up when he looked at her. But the moment was broken by the sound of horses approaching. Joseph was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, pushing her deeper into the shelter. Through the screen of rain-wet brush, they could see 3 riders picking their way along the valley floor. Bounty hunters, Maggie breathed, recognizing the type, hard men with harder eyes, the kind who'd hunt anything for the right price. Be still, Joseph murmured. They have not seen us. The riders passed slowly, scanning the cliffs. One of them, a man with a face like old leather, called out to his companions. Trail's washed out. If she came this way, she's probably drowned in a flash flood. $100 is $100, another replied. Dead or alive, Harrington just wants proof she won't cause him trouble. Maggie's hand found Joseph's arm, gripping tight. He covered her hand with his, a silent promise of protection. They waited, barely breathing, until the riders moved on and the sound of hooves faded into distance. They will be back, Joseph said once it was safe. This is the main pass. We must find another way. As they prepared to leave their shelter, Maggie caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What is it? You trust me now, he said simply. Before, you followed because you had no choice. Now you choose to stay. It was true, she realized. Sometime in the last 2 days, her fear of him had transformed into something else entirely. Yes, she said. I choose to stay. He smiled then. A real smile that transformed his usually serious face. Good, because path ahead is harder than what came before. But together. He shouldered his pack and held out his hand to help her over the rocks. Together. Maybe we make it. As they set off into the afternoon sun, picking their way toward a higher pass that would take them away from the usual routes, Maggie felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for survival, but for something more. The way Joseph had held her hand. The careful distance he maintained even while protecting her. The gentle strength in everything he did. It all spoke of possibilities she'd never dared imagine. The mountains rose around them, ancient and unforgiving, but no longer quite so frightening. She had a guide now, a protector who understood loss and survival in ways that matched her own. And perhaps, if she dared to hope, something more than that. The sun was setting by the time they made camp in a hidden valley where a small spring bubbled up from the rocks. As Joseph built their fire and she gathered what dry wood she could find, Maggie caught herself humming, her mother's lullaby, the one about sailing over the sea to sky. You sing? Joseph asked, looking up from the fire. She blushed. Not well. My mother had the real voice. Sing anyway, he said. These mountains hear too much sorrow. They could use songs. So she sang, softly at first, then with more confidence as the ancient melody filled the space between them. And when she finished, she could have sworn she saw tears in Joseph's eyes, though he turned away before she could be sure. That night, as they sat by their small fire with the vast tapestry of stars overhead, the space between them seemed charged with unspoken possibility. They were from different worlds, united by loss and flight, but finding in each other something neither had expected. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges. But tonight, they were safe in their hidden valley, and that was enough. The trading post sat in a dusty valley like a squat toad, all rough lumber and false fronts trying to look more substantial than they were. Smoke rose from chimneys despite the afternoon heat, and the sound of a badly tuned banjo drifted from what was obviously a saloon. After days in the wilderness, the cluster of buildings seemed both a relief and a threat. Joseph had changed his appearance before they approached, tying back his hair more severely and adjusting his clothing to look less Indian, more like a mixed-blood scout. "It is better this way," he'd explained, though the necessity of it made Maggie's stomach turn. She understood hiding. She was doing it too, but seeing him forced to diminish himself rankled. The smell hit them first. Whiskey and horse manure, unwashed bodies and bacon grease, all mixing in the afternoon sun. Men lounged on porches, their eyes tracking every movement. Maggie pulled her shawl up despite the heat, trying to look invisible. "Stay close," Joseph murmured. "Say nothing unless asked directly." They headed for the general store, passing the saloon where raucous laughter spilled out. Through the open doors, Maggie glimpsed men playing cards. Fallen women in faded finery serving drinks. One of them, a blonde with tired eyes, caught sight of Joseph and called out something in a language Maggie didn't recognize. He replied curtly without breaking stride. The general store was dim and cluttered. Shelves stacked with everything from ammunition to tea kettles. Behind the counter stood a thin man with suspicious eyes and hands that never strayed far from the shotgun propped nearby. "Joseph Walking Crow," the man said. Not quite friendly, but not hostile either. "Been a while. Thought the army had you scouting up north. Finish that work." Joseph replied, his English taking on a different cadence, less precise. "Need supplies. Heading into the mountains." The shopkeeper's eyes slid to Maggie. "And the lady?" "My business," Joseph said flatly. The man shrugged, but his expression remained calculating. While Joseph negotiated for supplies, Maggie wandered the store, trying to look casual while her nerves screamed. Through the window, she could see more riders arriving, dust clouds marking their approach. Near the back, 2 men were examining rifles, their conversation carrying clearly. Harrington raised it to 150. Must want that girl bad. Heard she stabbed him. Took his money and ran. Nah, Bill heard she burned down his barn with his prize horses inside. Each version of the story was worse than the last. Maggie gripped a shelf for support, fighting down panic. Samuel was painting her as a dangerous criminal, someone who deserved whatever happened when caught. A hand touched her elbow. Joseph, appearing silently beside her. "We go," he said quietly. But as they turned toward the door, it opened, and Maggie's heart stopped. 3 men entered, trail dust thick on their clothes, and she recognized one immediately. Frank Morrison, who ran the feed store in the town nearest Samuel's farm. His eyes swept the store and locked onto her. "Well, I'll be damned," he said slowly. "Margaret O'Sullivan." Joseph stepped slightly in front of her, his hand drifting toward his knife. The store went quiet. That dangerous stillness that precedes violence. "You're mistaken," Joseph said evenly. Morrison grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Don't think so. Breed, that's Harrington's Runaway. Worth a pretty penny, too. The lady travels with me." Joseph's voice carried a warning. "Best you move along." One of Morrison's companions laughed. "You threatening us, boy? 3 of us, 1 of you." "2, Maggie said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "2 of us." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Harrington said you might have taken up with some drifter. Didn't figure on a red man, though. That's gonna cost extra. Folks won't like hearing how you've been carrying on." The implications in his tone made her skin crawl. Joseph's tension was palpable, but he kept his voice level. "We want no trouble. We leave now." "Can't let you do that," Morrison said, his hand moving to his gun. 150 splits nice 3 ways, but it's all mine if I bring you in solo." Everything happened fast then. Joseph shoved Maggie behind a barrel as Morrison drew. The crack of gunfire was deafening in the enclosed space. Splinters exploded from the shelf beside her head. Joseph's knife was in his hand, flying, and Morrison screamed as it caught him in the shoulder. The shopkeeper's shotgun boomed, but he was aiming at the ceiling. "Not in my store," he roared. "Take it outside." Joseph grabbed Maggie's hand, pulling her toward the back door. Morrison's companions were scrambling for cover, shooting wild. They burst out into an alley that reeked of rotting vegetables and worse. "Run," Joseph commanded. But Maggie needed no urging. They sprinted between buildings, shouts erupting behind them. The whole trading post was stirring like a kicked anthill. Joseph led them to where he'd hidden their packs and his horse, a sturdy paint that stood steady despite the chaos. He swung up and pulled her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist as he kicked the horse into motion. Shots rang out as they galloped away from the trading post. Maggie pressed her face against Joseph's back, feeling the bunch and flow of his muscles as he guided the horse. They splashed across a stream, up a steep trail, putting distance between them and pursuit. Only when the trading post had disappeared from view did Joseph slow the horse. He guided them into a cluster of rocks, dismounting to check if they were followed. Maggie slid down, her legs shaky. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I've brought you nothing but trouble." Joseph turned to her, and she was shocked to see not anger but something fiercer in his eyes. "They would reduce you to property, sell you like cattle." His hands gripped her shoulders. "I will not let that happen." The intensity in his voice, the protective fury in his touch, it broke something open inside her. She leaned into him, and suddenly his arms were around her, holding her as she shook, not from fear, she realized, but from the overwhelming relief of being defended, protected, chosen. When she pulled back to look at him, something shifted in the air between them. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't known had fallen. The kiss happened naturally, inevitably, soft at first, then deeper as years of loneliness and fear melted away in the warmth of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Joseph rested his forehead against hers. "This complicates everything," he murmured. "I know." But she was smiling, feeling alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible. "They will hunt us harder now. A white woman with an Indian. They will make it about more than money." "Let them come," Maggie said fiercely. "I've been running from one thing or another my whole life, but this, us, it's the first thing worth fighting for." Joseph studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Then we fight, but first we run. I know places they cannot follow. Will not think to look." As they mounted the horse again, Maggie asked, "What did that woman at the saloon say to you?" Joseph was quiet for a moment. "She offered comfort for coin, said I looked like I carried heavy burdens." "What did you tell her?" "That my burdens were my own." He glanced back at her. "But that is no longer true." She tightened her arms around him. "Good, mine aren't either." They rode through the afternoon and into evening, leaving the main trails for paths only Joseph knew. As the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Maggie thought about the trading post, about the way those men had looked at her, like a prize to be won, a problem to be solved. But in Joseph's arms, she'd felt like a person, like someone worth protecting not for money but for her own sake. It was a new feeling, fragile as spring ice but growing stronger. The stars were coming out when they finally made camp in a hidden canyon. As Joseph tended the horse and built a small, smokeless fire, Maggie touched her lips, still feeling the echo of their kiss. Everything had changed in that moment. What had begun as a desperate alliance had become something deeper. "No regrets?" Joseph asked, watching her across the fire. "None," she said firmly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." He smiled, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. Together, then. As they settled in for the night, taking turns, keeping watch, Maggie thought about Samuel, about the men hunting her, about all the forces arrayed against them. The fear was still there, but it no longer consumed her. She had found something worth more than safety. She had found someone who saw her as more than property or burden. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, but tonight, under the vast expanse of stars, she was exactly where she belonged. The chase had driven them deep into the mountain passes, where ancient peaks rose like jagged teeth against the sky. For 2 days they'd stayed ahead of their pursuers, but the sound of horses echoing through the canyons told them their lead was shrinking. Joseph pushed their mount hard, following trails that seemed impossible, paths that only someone who'd lived in these mountains would know. The storm struck without warning. One moment the sky was clear, the next, black clouds rolled over the peaks like a wave, bringing wind that howled like a living thing. The temperature plummeted, and within minutes, rain turned to sleet, then to driving snow. "Hold tight!" Joseph shouted over the wind, guiding the horse along a narrow ledge. One misstep would send them tumbling into the abyss below. Maggie pressed against his back, her arms locked around his waist, feeling the controlled desperation in his movements. Thunder crashed overhead, a mountain storm with all nature's fury. Lightning illuminated the landscape in stark, terrifying flashes. The horse stumbled, whinnying in fear, and for a heart-stopping moment they slid toward the edge before Joseph managed to regain control. Then came the shots. Even through the storm, the crack of rifles was unmistakable. Their pursuers had found them, were firing blind through the snow and darkness. Joseph cursed in his own language and urged the horse faster. A bullet whined past Maggie's ear. Another struck the rock wall beside them, sending chips flying. Then Joseph made a sound, part gasp, part grunt, and she felt him sway in the saddle. "Joseph?" "I'm fine," he said through gritted teeth, but she could feel wetness spreading where her arm pressed against his side. Blood. Another volley of shots. The horse screamed and lurched. They were going down. Joseph managed to kick free of the stirrups, grabbing Maggie and rolling with her as the horse fell. They tumbled down a slope, Joseph trying to shield her with his body, before crashing to a stop in a grove of pines. The horse was gone, lost to the storm and darkness. Joseph lay still for a moment, breathing hard. When lightning flashed again, Maggie saw the dark stain spreading across his leather shirt. "You're hurt." Her hands shook as she tried to examine the wound. "Shoulder," he managed. "Bullet went through. Need to move. They'll follow." She helped him to his feet, taking as much of his weight as she could. The storm was a blessing now. It would hide their tracks, mask their movement. Through the driving snow, she spotted darkness that might be shelter, a cave or deep overhang. It was a cave, narrow-mouthed, but opening into a larger chamber. They stumbled inside, collapsing against the far wall. Outside, the storm raged like the end of the world, by touch more than sight. Maggie examined Joseph's wound. The bullet had indeed passed through the meat of his shoulder, missing bones and major vessels by inches. But he was losing blood, and in the cold, that could kill him as surely as any bullet. "Need to stop the bleeding," she said, trying to sound calm despite her terror. "Fire first," Joseph said weakly. Back of cave, old fire ring. Mountain men used this place. She found it, a circle of stones with ancient ashes. Her hands were numb with cold as she searched for anything dry enough to burn. There, a pack wedged in a crevice, left by some previous occupant. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were matches and kindling. The fire took 3 tries to catch, her frozen fingers barely able to strike the matches. But finally, blessed warmth and light filled the cave. In the flickering glow, Joseph's face was pale, etched with pain. Maggie worked with desperate efficiency. She cut away his shirt, using water from their remaining supply to clean the wound. The sight of the bullet hole, neat in front, ragged behind, made her stomach turn. But she forced herself to focus. "In my pack," Joseph said, voice growing weaker. "Medicine bundle, blue-beaded pouch." She found it, hands trembling. Inside were herbs and what looked like moss, following his whispered instructions. She packed the wound and bound it with strips torn from her petticoat. The white cotton turned red almost immediately. Too much blood, he murmured. Getting cold. No! The word came out fierce. You don't get to die on me, Joseph Walking Crow. Not after everything. She built up the fire until it roared, then carefully moved him closer to its warmth. His skin was cool to the touch, his breathing shallow. She lay beside him, pulling him against her, sharing her body heat. Maggie, he whispered, if they find us, they won't. The storm will keep them away. But if they do, you run. Don't let them. Stop talking. She pressed her face against his neck, feeling his pulse. Too fast, too weak. Save your strength. The storm howled outside their shelter, but within, there was only the crackle of fire and their mingled breathing. Maggie had never felt so helpless, so terrified. This man who'd saved her, protected her, shown her what it meant to be valued. She couldn't lose him now. Tell me about your sister, she said, desperate to keep him conscious. What was her name? Winona, he murmured. Means firstborn daughter. She was beautiful. Laughed like water over stones. His voice grew softer. You would have liked her. Tell me more. So he talked, sometimes in English, sometimes slipping into Lakota, while she held him and willed him to live. He told her about teaching Winona to track deer, about the way she could gentle any horse, about her baby's first smile. The memories seemed to give him strength, anchoring him to life. The night wore on, endless and terrifying. Twice Joseph's breathing grew so shallow she thought she'd lost him, but each time he pulled back from the brink, murmuring her name like a prayer. Near dawn, his fever broke. Maggie wept with relief as his skin cooled to normal temperature. His breathing deepened. When he opened his eyes, truly focusing on her for the first time in hours, she couldn't help herself. She kissed him, tasting tears and desperation and joy. You stayed, he whispered against her lips. Where else would I go? She smoothed his hair back, hands still trembling. He'll kill me if I go back, remember? But the words had taken on new meaning. It wasn't just Samuel she couldn't return to now. It was any life that didn't include Joseph, somewhere in this cave, watching him fight for life. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The storm's passing, he observed, hearing the change in the wind's sound. They'll come looking. Let him. She helped him sit up, checking his bandages. How do you feel? Like I was shot, he said with a weak smile. But alive, thanks to you. You saved me first. I'm just returning the favor. He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. This is more than favors now. Yes, she agreed simply. Much more. They stayed in the cave through the day, Joseph regaining strength while Maggie kept watch. The storm had wiped away all traces of their passage, but she knew it was only a matter of time before their pursuers picked up the trail again. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Joseph tested his legs, leaning heavily on her but able to walk. There's a place, he said, sacred to my people, hidden. They won't follow there, too afraid of Indian magic. His smile was grim. White men's superstition will be our protection. Can you make it? With you, I can make it anywhere. They prepared to leave as sunset approached, gathering what supplies they could carry. Joseph fashioned a sling for his arm, wincing but determined. As they stood at the cave mouth, looking out at the mountains washed clean by storm, he pulled her close with his good arm. Whatever happens, he said, I need you to know, these days with you have been worth more than the years before. We're going to have years together, she said fiercely. Years and years. I won't accept anything else. He smiled, that rare, beautiful expression that transformed his face. Then we better start walking. They left the cave as shadows grew long, two figures against the vastness of mountains and sky. Behind them lay blood and storm and near death. Ahead waited uncertainty, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Dawn broke gray and misty over the pine forest, the air thick with moisture that clung to every surface. Maggie woke to the sound of movement, too heavy for deer, too purposeful for any animal. Her hand found Joseph's arm, and he was already awake, alert despite his injury. Through the morning fog, they could make out shapes. 5 men, moving in formation through the trees. Samuel Harrington led them, his bulk unmistakable even at a distance. Beside him rode Morrison, his arm in a sling from Joseph's knife, and 3 other hard-faced men Maggie didn't recognize. Joseph's hand moved to his rifle, but they both knew the truth. Outnumbered and with him wounded, a direct fight would end only one way. They were hidden behind a cluster of boulders, but it was only a matter of time before the trackers found their trail. The sacred place. Joseph whispered, "Half-mile north, if we can reach it." But even as he spoke, one of the trackers pointed at the ground near their last campfire. They'd found the trail. "There!" Morrison's shout split the morning air. "Behind those rocks!" Gunfire erupted, bullets spanging off stone. Joseph pushed Maggie down, returning fire to buy seconds, but his wounded shoulder made his aim unsteady, and they had limited ammunition. "Run!" he hissed. "I'll hold them. We run together or not at all." There was no time to argue. They broke from cover, Joseph's rifle cracking to keep their pursuers' heads down. The forest became a blur of green and brown as they ran, branches tearing at their clothes, roots trying to trip them. Behind them, shouts and curses and the crash of men through underbrush. A bullet whined past Maggie's ear. Another clipped a branch just above Joseph's head. The sacred place, a box canyon with ancient pictographs and burial mounds, was close now, but their pursuers were closing fast. Then Joseph stumbled, his face going gray. Fresh blood seeped through his bandages. He was pushing himself beyond his body's limits, and they both knew it. "Just a little farther," Maggie urged, half carrying him now. They burst into a small clearing, and there it was, the entrance to the sacred canyon, marked by 2 towering stones carved with symbols she couldn't read. Joseph spoke rapid words in Lakota, asking forgiveness for bringing violence to this place. The pursuers emerged from the trees, spreading out in a semicircle. Samuel Harrington dismounted, his face red with exertion and rage. Up close, Maggie could see what 4 years under his roof had hidden. The cruel set of his mouth, the deadness in his eyes. "Thought you could run from me, girl?" His voice carried the same threatening tone she'd heard so many times. "Thought you could steal from me, burn my property, spread lies about me? I never—" "Shut your mouth!" He stepped closer, and Maggie felt Joseph tense beside her despite his weakness. "You've cost me time, money, and reputation. Taking up with this savage, bringing shame on my household." "Your household was already full of shame," Maggie said, finding courage in desperation. "Everyone in town knows what you are, even if they pretend not to see." Samuel's face darkened. "Morrison, take the breed. The girl comes back with me." "No." Joseph stepped forward, swaying but determined. "She is under my protection." Morrison laughed. "Your protection? You can barely stand, boy." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Morrison raised his pistol, aiming at Joseph. Maggie moved without thinking, stepping in front of the man she'd come to love. The gun boomed, echoing off the canyon walls, but the shot went wild. Morrison's eyes widened in shock as he looked down at the knife blooming from his chest. Joseph's last blade, thrown with desperate accuracy despite his wounds. Morrison toppled backward, gun falling from nerveless fingers. The other men raised their weapons, but Samuel held up a hand. "No, I want to do this myself." He pulled his own pistol, leveling it at Joseph. "You've corrupted her, made her wild, but I'll fix that once you're gone." "You won't touch her again." Joseph's voice was steady despite the blood loss, despite everything. "I'll die first." "That's the idea." Maggie heard the click of the hammer being cocked. Time slowed. She thought of her parents, of Joseph's sister, of all the innocents who'd died for others' cruelty. Not again. Not him. "Samuel!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "You want me back? Then face me yourself. Or are you only brave when beating defenseless girls?" He turned the gun on her, and she saw murder in his eyes. You always did have too much mouth on you. And you always were a coward. She stepped away from Joseph, drawing Samuel's attention. Big man, hurting those who can't fight back. Your wife knew what you were. That's why she left, isn't it? Ran off rather than spend another night in your bed. Shut up! Everyone whispers about it. How she took your son and disappeared. How you tell people she died, but really she just couldn't stand. The gun swung toward her face. She stared down the barrel. Seeing her death there, but knowing she'd bought Joseph a chance, that was enough. The shot was impossibly loud, but it wasn't Samuel's gun that had fired. He stood there, shock replacing rage on his face, as a red stain spread across his chest. Behind him, one of his own men, the youngest, barely more than a boy, held a smoking rifle. My sister, the boy said quietly. She worked for you 3 years ago, came home with bruises, came home broken, then came home with child and killed herself from shame. Samuel fell to his knees, then forward. The clearing went silent except for the wind in the pines and the distant cry of a hawk. The remaining men looked at each other, then at the boy who'd shot their employer. One of them spat tobacco juice. Never did like working for him anyway. What say we tell folks he got killed by Indians? Tragic story. No reward to collect if she's dead too. She looks pretty dead to me. Another agreed, not meeting Maggie's eyes. Both of them. Indians killed them all. They gathered Morrison's and Samuel's bodies, the boy helping without expression. As they prepared to leave, he looked back at Maggie. My sister's name was Catherine. Catherine Mills. Someone should remember. I'll remember. Maggie promised. Then they were gone, hoofbeats fading into distance, leaving Maggie and Joseph alone in the sacred canyon. She flew to his side, finding him conscious but deathly pale. Is it over? He asked. It's over. He's dead. They're going to say Indians killed us all. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good. Dead people are free to go where they please. She helped him deeper into the canyon, finding a sheltered spot near a spring. His wound had reopened during the confrontation, and she worked frantically to stop the bleeding. As she did, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Samuel was dead. The man who'd terrorized her for 4 years, who'd haunted her dreams and driven her into the wilderness, was gone. She waited to feel guilt, but found only relief so profound it made her dizzy. We're free, she whispered. Joseph caught her hand. You saved us, drawing his attention, making him angry enough to be careless. We saved each other. She kissed his palm, then his lips, gentle and grateful. That's what we do now. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the mist, they rested in the sacred canyon. Tomorrow they would have to move, find somewhere to build a life where 2 supposed dead people could start over. It wouldn't be easy. The world had no place for a white woman and a Lakota man together, but they'd already survived the impossible. Everything else was just details. No more running, Joseph murmured, already half asleep from exhaustion and blood loss. No more running, Maggie agreed, keeping watch as he rested. The words she'd carried like a burden, he'll kill me if I go back, had lost their power. There was no going back now, only forward, and for the first time in her life, forward looked like a place she wanted to be. Autumn painted the grasslands in shades of gold and rust, the aspens on the distant mountains burning like flames against the deep blue sky. A small creek gurgled past their cabin, its sound a constant, peaceful companion to their days. Maggie stood in the doorway, watching the sunset paint the clouds in colors that still took her breath away, even after 6 months in this hidden valley. Joseph emerged from the tree line, a string of trout over his shoulder. His wound had healed, leaving only a puckered scar as reminder of that terrible day. He moved with his old grace again. At home in this wilderness they'd claimed as their own. Good catch, she said, taking the fish from him. I'll fry them with the wild onions I found. He pulled her close, kissing her temple. Smells like bread. My 3rd attempt, I think I finally got the Dutch oven figured out. It was a simple life, far from any town or settlement. They'd built the cabin together through the summer. working side by side to create something that belonged to both of them. No one knew they were here. To the world, Margaret O'Sullivan and Joseph Walking Crow were dead, killed in an Indian raid along with Samuel Harrington. Sometimes Maggie thought about the boy who'd shot Samuel, wondered if he'd found peace in his act of justice. She kept her promise, remembering Catherine Mills in her prayers each night, along with Joseph's sister Winona and all the others who'd suffered at cruel hands. Letter came, Joseph said, producing a worn envelope from his shirt. They had one contact with the outside world, a mixed-blood trader who brought supplies every few months and carried messages to Joseph's surviving relatives in the north. Maggie read quickly, then smiled. Your cousin had her baby, a girl. She named her Hope. A good name, Joseph said, for a new generation. They prepared dinner together, falling into the comfortable rhythm they'd developed. No more looking over shoulders, no more running. The nearest neighbor was a 2-day ride away, an old mountain man who asked no questions and sometimes traded venison for vegetables from Maggie's garden. As they ate by lamplight, autumn wind rattling the shutters, Maggie found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The terror of those early days seemed like another lifetime now. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Giving up your work as a scout? Staying hidden here with me? Joseph considered, his dark eyes thoughtful. I spent years walking between two worlds, belonging to neither. Here, with you, I belong completely. He reached across the table to take her hand. Do you regret not trying for a town life? You could have gone east, started over where no one knew you. And done what? Been a shop girl? A governess? Married some man who'd see me as property, just like Samuel did? She shook her head. This is freedom. Joseph, this is home. After dinner, they sat on the porch despite the evening chill, wrapped in a blanket Joseph's aunt had woven. The stars emerged one by one, brilliant in the clear mountain air. An owl called from the pines, answered by its mate. I've been thinking, Joseph said carefully. There's a missionary couple 3 valleys over. They perform marriages, don't ask many questions. Maggie's heart skipped. They'd spoken of this before, the impossibility of legal marriage between white and Indian. But here, at the edge of civilization, are you asking? He turned to face her fully. Margaret O'Sullivan, you saved my life in more ways than one. You've shared my dangers, my exile, my bed. Will you share my name? Yes, she said simply, tears stinging her eyes. Though technically I'm dead, remember? Then I'll marry a ghost, he said with a smile, the most beautiful ghost in all the territories. 2 weeks later, they stood before Reverend and Mrs. Carlton, an elderly couple who'd spent 40 years ministering to anyone who needed them, regardless of race or circumstance. The ceremony was simple. No guests, no finery, just promises made in a tiny chapel with autumn light streaming through hand-cut windows. You may face hardships, Reverend Carlton warned gently. The world isn't kind to unions like yours. We've already faced the worst, Maggie said, squeezing Joseph's hand. Everything else is just life. Mrs. Carlton, a practical woman with kind eyes, pressed a package into Maggie's hands afterward. Seeds from my garden, vegetables, herbs, flowers. Every home needs growing things. As they rode home, truly home now, Maggie thought about seeds and growing things and the future stretching before them. There would be challenges. She knew. If they had children, those children would face a world that might not accept them. Their isolation protected them but also limited them. But watching Joseph ride beside her, seeing the peace in his face that had replaced the guarded wariness of their first meeting, she knew they'd made the right choice. They'd chosen love over safety, freedom over acceptance, each other over everything else. That first winter was hard. Snows came early and deep, trapping them in the cabin for weeks at a time. But they had wood stocked, food preserved, and each other. Maggie taught Joseph to read better, using her mother's Bible and what few books they'd acquired. He taught her his language, stories of his people, skills for surviving on the land. By spring, when the snow melted and the world came alive again, Maggie knew she was carrying their child, The joy in Joseph's eyes when she told him was worth every hardship they'd endured. "What if," he started, worry creeping into his voice. "No," she interrupted. "No what ifs. We'll face whatever comes the way we always have. Together." The trader who brought supplies also brought a midwife when Maggie's time came. Another mixed-blood woman who understood their situation without judgment. Their daughter was born as the aspens turned gold again. A perfect blend of her parents with Joseph's dark hair and Maggie's green eyes. They named her Faith as Maggie recovered, nursing their daughter while Joseph sang Lakota lullabies. She thought back to that desperate flight across the prairie. The woman who'd run from Samuel Harrington's farm seemed like a stranger now. Terrified. Alone. Certain only of what she was running from, not what she was running to. "What are you thinking?" Joseph asked, settling beside them on the bed. "About how I used to tell myself, he'll kill me if I go back. It was fear that kept me going at first, but now—" She looked at their daughter, at him, at the life they'd built. "Now I know it wasn't really about him at all. It was about finding you, finding myself." Joseph kissed her forehead. The spirits work in mysterious ways. Outside, the first snows of their second winter together began to fall, soft and silent. Their cabin was warm, filled with the smell of bread and wood smoke and baby. On the mantel sat her mother's Bible next to Joseph's medicine bundle, symbols of the two worlds that had created this new one. Maggie had thought freedom would mean being alone, answerable to no one. Instead, she'd found it meant choosing who to be answerable to, who to build a life with, who to become. The scared girl was gone, replaced by a woman who could birth a child in a cabin, tend a garden, skin a deer, speak 2 languages, and love without reservation. As night fell over their hidden valley, she nursed Faith while Joseph played soft notes on a flute he'd carved. The melody spoke of journeys ended and new ones beginning, of sorrow transformed into joy, of 2 people who'd found home in each other. "No regrets?" Joseph asked, echoing their old question. "None," Maggie answered, meaning it completely. "Not one." The snow continued to fall, blanketing their valley in pristine white. But inside the cabin, warmed by fire and love and possibility, 3 souls made their own world, far from the prejudices and cruelties that had once defined their lives. They were free, they were family, they were home, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, romance, and adventure from the American frontier. What did you think of Maggie and Joseph's journey? Share your thoughts with us.